So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Beef and Lamb New Zealand Informing New Zealand Beef Program Update and New Traits Development webinar. My name is Vaughan. I am the Acting Beef Operations Specialist covering for Anna Boyd while she's on maternity leave. So before we get underway with the webinar, we'll just run through some of the housekeeping. So we are recording this webinar. That's just so other people can see it down the line. If you wouldn't mind muting your speaker, muting yourself during the presentations, but obviously in the Q&A sessions, take yourself off mute so we can get all those good questions coming through. If you have questions through midway through the presentations, feel free to put them in the chat box. That's at the bottom of the screen. And I'll probably save up those the chat questions to the very end of the webinar. Oh yeah, just down here, yep. Put your questions in that chat box there. And then if you've got questions after each speaker and just want to ask those, just take yourself off mute. And yeah, as stated here, we've allowed some time after each topic for questions. So to make it easier so that you can see the presentation content and the person speaking, we suggest that you use the side-by-side speaker view. So you can go to the view option at the top of your screen and just select that side-by-side speaker. So the format for today, we'll have a brief update on the Informing New Zealand Beef program from Gemma Jenkins. And then we'll move into the new trait development work. First off, we'll have Jason Archer. He'll talk about the body condition scoring program. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A after that. Then Franzi Weik will talk about some of the work she's doing with the fertility traits. And then finally, Jason will be back to talk about the methane and feed efficiency work that's going on as well. So I'll pass it over to Gemma now, and we can get underway.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm Gemma Jenkins, and I'm the Informing New Zealand Beef Program Manager, or INZB Program Manager. So I am cognizant of the fact that not everyone on the call will necessarily know much about the program. So I thought I'll just give you a bit of an overview of the program. So it was really born out of the fact that we could see, if you look at that graph on the top right-hand side there, that the genetic gain we were achieving in the beef industry was lower than that we were achieving in the sheep and dairy industries. And you can see that the annual benefit of genetic gain for, I don't have a pointer that works, but you can see that the beef, the industry value there for genetic gain was a lot lower for beef than it was for dairy and sheep. So that's really where the idea of the INZB program was born out of. And I've gone one slide too far. There we go. So yeah, the INZB program is a 7-year program, and it's jointly funded 60% by Beef and Lamb New Zealand and 40% by MPI through their Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures Fund. And the aim of the program is really to improve sustainability and profitability across New Zealand's beef sector through the development of improved genetics. And basically what we're aiming to do is to develop a system that includes traits that are important to New Zealand beef farmers. And out of the program, we want to produce easy to use genetic tools that allow farmers to make profitable decisions for their operations. And ultimately though, for the program to have those returns at an industry-wide level, we need to get the tools, the genetic tools that we produce, into the hands of farmers. So a large part of the program is really around creating a new approach to extension so that we can increase farmer engagement with the program and drive adoption of those tools across industry. So there's 5 main projects that make up the INZB program, and I'll step through each one of those throughout the next few slides. So project 1 is all around developing its New Zealand breeding objectives and developing New Zealand selection indexes. Project 2 is new trait development. Project 3 is our on-farm stuff. Project 4 is data and genetic evaluations, and Project 5 is that industry uptake and extension work. So Project 1 is our breeding objective and selection index project, and your breeding objective obviously is your goal. That's your goalpost. That's where you want to head, and the selection indexes are the tools that you use to get there. So really our indexes should be fit for our New Zealand industry. So that is, we should be including traits that are relevant to the New Zealand environment, and they should therefore be included in our genetic evaluations and our selection indexes to make sure that we're making genetic progress on them, while obviously still making progress on our current production traits. So for the INZB program, we've got here our breeding objective is around driving a sustainable and profitable beef industry for New Zealand. And the selection indexes that we've developed as part of the program are the terminal index, the maternal index, and dairy beef indexes as well. So we decided on those indexes after a consultation process. So we talked to our industry and technical advisory groups. We also carried out a farmer survey, and we also had a global beef genetic evaluation review carried out as well. So as well as informing what selection indexes we were going to develop as part of the program, that also helped inform what traits we are looking to develop as part of the program. So I've just got some of the traits that we're looking at here, and I don't really need to go into each of these apart from just because obviously Jason and Franzi will be talking about them today, but just to say that we're doing some fertility trial work, body condition score. We've developed a body condition score genetic evaluation, so that's almost complete, undergoing validation at the moment. And once we get data from breeders, we'll be able to estimate some EBVs for industry for body condition score. And Jason's going to talk about the feed intake and greenhouse gas work we've been doing as well. So this is just a photo of some of our Kepler beef progeny test heifers up at Tamania with the Vitality feed intake bins there. And then, yeah, I've got a picture of the portable accumulation chambers, which I think Jason's going to talk about as well, in place in Tamania up there as well. So that's one of the Kepler beef progeny test animals, which is about to walk out of there. So project 3 is our beef progeny test and commercial herd project. So the purpose of the beef progeny test is really around allowing us to create a crossbreed evaluation so that we can compare like with like when commercial farmers are looking at bulls. And it also allows us obviously to be able to investigate new traits as well. So that's, you know, we are using some of our beef progeny test animals for that fertility trait development work, for example. So we've got 2 beef progeny test sites. We've got, excuse me, the Kepler beef progeny test site, and at Kepler we've got Hereford and Angus cows, and we make them with Hereford and Angus bulls. So you can just see with this diagram that we make them all different ways, and then we take various measurements with the steers and various measurements with the heifers. We also have the Lochinver. We've got another beef progeny test site up at Lochinver in the North Island, and up there we've got Angus cows, and we mate Hereford, Angus, and Simmental bulls across them. So what's been happening lately is we had a call for bull nominations out for the upcoming mating season, and we had 30 nominations, and we've selected 18 bulls. So 7 each of Angus and Hereford, and 4 Simmental. Obviously that's contingent on successfully collecting from those bulls. And we've also got our commercial herd project, which is part of project 3 as well. And the idea with the commercial herd project is really about connecting all that commercial level data, so maternal type stuff and processor level data, back to the breeder level via genotyping. So that enables us to get more accurate EBVs for bulls. So we aim to onboard 10 commercial farmers a year. As of the start of July, we've got 37 commercial farmers that are part of the program. I can actually see Andy, one of them that's involved in the program, online now. And we've got almost 4,000 commercial animals with data loaded into the database as well. So Sonia Shaw is the project lead for the commercial farm project, and she has recently held a farmer day up in Amberley, and the focus was on artificial insemination and improve, which I'll talk about in a wee minute. So they went through the Excel Breeding Centre up there, and the reason why we had a focus on AI is because one of the objectives of the program is to drive AI uptake throughout the industry, just because that can accelerate the rates of genetic gain that can be achieved. This is just, I've got some examples. So we've been producing some farmer reports for farmers that have got data in the database, and this is just an example of a couple of the graphs that are in those reports. So we've got the distribution of body condition score here and conception day as well. Project 4 is our data management and genetic evaluation. So this is just a simplified diagram, but raw data can get input into our improved database. We crunch the numbers with the genetic evaluation to produce the EBVs, and then that gets reported, so the bull EBVs can get reported out to farmers to make selection decisions via the public improve reporting tool. So what's been happening with this project at the moment is we're developing improve for beef. So you can see on the right hand side there, I've just got a screenshot of the currently available sheep improve tool, which you can go online and have a look at if you haven't had a play with it already. And we're working with breed societies at the moment to carry out a trial of public improve with bull EBVs. For the genetic evaluation project, we've got gross, maternal and carcass modules have been developed or are in development. And as I mentioned before, we've got that body condition score genetic evaluation up and running, and we're also looking at incorporating genomic data. One of the other things we're doing is running a trial with IGS, so International Genetic Solution. So that's a multi-breed evaluation based out of the States, and it already collects data from 18 or produces EBVs for 18 breed societies around the world. And the idea of being involved in that particular evaluation is that we can draw on lots of international information, which will obviously increase the accuracy of the EBVs that are available for bulls. And we're working with breed societies to run a trial of IGS, and also we've sent over some of our beef progeny test data to them as well. So project 5 is our extension project, and I've just listed out some of the things that have been happening or are going to be happening. So we've run 13 better beef breeding workshops this year across 7 different regions, and we also held an online workshop as well. For the beef breeders that are on the call, mark it in your diaries. I think it's the 18th of March next year in Christchurch. We're going to have our second beef breeders forum, so just a wee plug there. And we also have recently held a workshop on artificial insemination and looking at the factors that influence adoption and what some of the key things are that farmers need to consider if they're thinking about using AI. We've also obviously been running some webinars. So there's this one today, and we also had a Genetics 101 webinar with some commercial farmers on Monday this week as well. And then I've just listed out some of the resources that have been produced as part of the program. So if you jump on Beef and Lamb's Knowledge Hub and search for INZB or beef or something like that, you should find some of these resources on there. And that's me. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of things today, but the first one is just about body condition scoring. We've collected a bunch of data over the years from the original progeny test, which was started almost 10 years ago now. And Franzi, who's going to be talking to you in a while, did her PhD analysing this, and 3 years of her life basically boils down to a few key tables. And this was one of them, and I'm not going to talk about the table in general. It's just a whole lot of genetic and phenotypic relationships between the different traits that we're measuring. One of the key relationships that we looked at in here is relationship between fertility, and this is fertility as a 2-year-old rebreeding for her second calf, and body condition score, either as a 2-year-old or as a mixed age cow. And when we calculate those genetic correlations, we've got 2 different ways of looking at fertility there. RB is just rebreeding, so that's just 0 or 1. Did she have a calf or not? DTC2 is days to conception as a 2-year-old, so that's, in other words, how long it took her to get in calf, with a penalty for those that didn't get in calf. Just think of it as days to calving, but it's not actually based on calving date, it's based off conception date. So 2 different ways to measure fertility. They're basically the same trait. And then we look at the relationship between body condition score and those fertility measures, and basically the relationship is next to nothing. So body condition score at the genetic level, so these are the genetic relationships, essentially is not the same thing as fertility. At the phenotypic level, which the numbers are actually up on the top diagonal, there is a relationship. So we all know that obviously phenotypically we need to get cows into good body condition score to be able to get good fertility outcomes. So that's a management type thing. At a genetic relationship level, body condition score and fertility are not the same thing. So I think of body condition score as something that we do want to improve to make it easier to manage our cows rather than directly to select for fertility. So it's really a ease of management type of attribute. And then another key number in these huge number of numbers is the ones that we've got here. So if we look at body condition score on cows, and then we look at the correlation of that with fat depth, which is measured on heifers and steers, so obviously younger animals, then the correlations there were 0.29 or 0.25, which are not great correlations. What it's saying is that that the fat depth on those young animals is a poor predictor of body condition score of cows. And yet when I hear breeders talking, I hear a lot of talk about we want positive fats, and they're not talking about positive fats because they want carcass. They're talking about positive fats because they want cows that will maintain condition score. So my conclusion from looking at these numbers is that actually talking about positive fats to try and change body condition score is not really that sensible. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One is that body condition score, of course, is actually not just fat, it's fat and muscle. And as cows go up and down in body condition score, they actually put on quite a bit of lean tissue as well as fat. And then the other thing is that growing animals are just physiologically different to lactating cows. Now that sounds like it's stating the obvious, and it sort of is, but I guess when we look at a whole lot of trait correlations, we do see that growing animals are different to cows. And the implications of that is if we are starting to use fat EBVs to improve body condition score of cows, well, then we're not actually going to make a whole lot of progress in cow body condition score. And then conversely, if we were to make a change in cow body condition score, we're going to have to add a large amount of fat and possibly too much to carcasses. So really, if we want to change cow body condition score, why don't we just measure it on cows and have an EBV for it? It's cheap to measure. It's a score that you can take yourself. It's relatively easy to do. So why just not measure and select directly on what we want to change? So that's the logic behind this. So how to measure? Beef and lamb has some resources on this. Here's one resource, which is we've actually got a booklet which was produced, I think, in 2017 with input from PAMU and Massey University and Ag First. And so that outlines the condition score scale that New Zealand uses. And it's not just for genetics, it's in general. Basically, in the progeny test, we found that cows ranked similarly across the year. So we were measuring them at 3 times a year: weaning, pre-calving, and pre-mating. Those traits are genetically the same across the year there. So actually, technically, it doesn't really matter what time of year you measure. The mean might go up and go down, but the cows are going to rank the same or very similarly within those times. If you were going to measure body condition score, I would definitely recommend getting a cow weight at the same time, potentially a hip height, which in time could be used, because really what we're trying to get at is this nexus of how much does the cow weigh, what sort of condition is she, and what sort of frame is she. And at the moment, the tools that most of us have got, with the exception of Angus Pro, who do have a body condition score EBV available, then they will, we're really trying to get at this more moderate framed cow that will maintain condition, and cow weight by itself is not necessarily telling the whole picture. If you are wanting to submit data on cow weights, particularly to breed plan, that cow weight needs to be taken within 2 weeks of calving. So if you're going to do both and put data through breed plan, then I would definitely recommend you do it at weaning time. But if we were going to analyze the data, we could take it from any time of the year based on the evidence that we have. Another question I get asked is, oh, breed plan have a 1 to 6 scale. We're using the New Zealand 1 to 10 scale. Isn't that a big problem? I think the answer is no. So if you look at the scores on a 1 to 10 scale, essentially in the New Zealand scale, 1 to 3 is essentially used for animal welfare. If you've got 3s or lower in your herd, they're sick, generally animals with poor health. We don't see that commercially, other than just 1 or 2 animals that are really sick and on their way out and need to be culled. Commercially, generally we find animals will range from 4 through to 9 on our scale, and 10 is excessively fat. In fact, I think most people have probably never seen a 10 in their life. 10's fat to the point where it can't get up the raceway. And so actually those scores are pretty translatable. Score 4 through to 9, which is what you'll score using the 10-point system, pretty translatable to that 6-point scale that's used by breed plan. So it's pretty easy to translate from one to the other. We also on our on the beef and lamb site, the Knowledge Hub, we've also done a video. So Anna Boyd did that, and you can go onto the site and watch that video, which sort of outlines how to score. And Gemma's already talked about the fact that we are producing an evaluation so that we can process data. We'll also be talking with the breed societies about how, whether and how they want us to analyse that data. And so we'll be able to do that fairly shortly. But yeah, I'll leave that there.
Excellent, thanks, Jason. We probably have got time for probably two questions tops for that body condition score topic. If there are more questions on that topic, we can cover it at the end. So if anyone's got any questions now, just remember to take yourself off mute and let us know.
Was there any genetic correlation, or did you find that some cows would be a 6 at weaning and a 6 at pre-calving body condition, but some went from a 7 to 5, and was that genetic?
No, really is the answer. So we, I guess when we looked at the correlations between, say, weaning, pre-calving, and pre-mating, the correlations at the genetic level were something between about 0.87 and 0.95. So in other words, they're close enough to 1 that it doesn't matter, which is basically saying that all the cows, if the mean moved up by 2 condition scores, then most of the cows, or at least the sire rankings of those cows, of the size of those cows, if you think about it at the genetic level, would move up and down by a similar amount. So there's not really, at a genetic level, there's not really cows that just maintain and others that go up and down. Phenotypically, you might see that, Andrew, but not genetically.
All right, I'll hand over to Franzi, who will talk to us about the fertility trait work.
So good afternoon, everyone. For those people that don't know me, I work at Beef and Lamb New Zealand Genetics as a geneticist, so primarily really focusing on analysing the data that is coming in from our progeny tests and the commercial herds. So my talk today will really directly follow up on what Jason was just talking about. As he mentioned, body condition score is not really a trait that we can use to directly select for fertility, but it is more an ease of management trait. So we were really wondering what are actually the possibilities of selecting for those traits that are directly related to fertility. So from a fertility perspective, we wanted to see if there's anything that we can actually record on those extensive farms that would allow us to look at cow fertility more closely. So something that we can actually use to maximize the genetic potential for fertility in our herds. So I just try to map out our thought process here. So essentially the life of a beef heifer from birth to maturity, obviously, or something like that. So heifers are usually first mated around 15 months of age, and then are they calving for the first time as a 2-year-old in spring. And then in summer, they are mated for the second time, and the cycle essentially starts over again. So currently our information on fertility related traits in those beef herds is very, very limited. And all we really know and record is essentially the day the bull goes into the breeding herd and then the subsequent calving date. And so the genetic improvement of the maternal herd is really achieved by selecting for days to calving as a difference between those two dates. But this is generally a low heritable trait of only about 7%. So the issue with this is that with the available data, we can't really separate between how long does it actually take the animal to conceive and then the subsequent gestation length under those natural mating scenarios, because we don't know the actual conception date. But results of the dairy industry actually suggest that if we could manage to break down fertility into some more specific components, that we could actually use this information to improve heritability and improve the genetic scope for, or the scope for genetic improvement. So, for example, looking at age of puberty in dairy cows has shown to be genetically correlated with fertility in cows. So if we assume that we actually had knowledge of this underlying cycling activity of the animal, we could potentially use this information to infer a whole lot more information. So with this knowledge, we're actually really hoping to receive much more accurate information on a series of cycling dates. So for example, when does the heifer start cycling for the very first time? So when does she actually hit puberty? And then during the first mating season, when does she stop cycling as an indication of her conception date? And then following her first calving season, when does she resume with a regular cycling activity and essentially conceive as a 2-year-old? So from this information, we could then infer quite a few different traits for future genetic evaluation purposes that would actually allow us to break down fertility even further. And this is really where our new research is coming in. So at the moment, we are trialing the use of sensor technology in form of cow miniature ear tags as a way to remotely capture this data and to help us really predict cycling activity derived from activity patterns. So at the moment, we're still very much in the trial phase, and this is essentially to assess the feasibility of using this technology in extensive beef herds. Sensor technology so far has been quite widely used to derive the cycling activity in dairy cows, but it is not yet really widely used for that same purpose in beef. So currently we're trialing the technology on 2 beef herds on a total of about 400 first calvers and rebreeding heifers. And ultimately, once we're actually confident that we are getting the desired outcomes, the goal would be to then upscale the project and include another 10 to 20 more farms and pretty much record animals from once they've been weaned up until pregnancy testing after the second breeding season. So this is really to allow us to have enough animals to get accurate estimates of genetic parameters before we can then consider incorporating those traits into future genetic evaluations. So where are we at with this at the moment? So the traits that you can see here at the bottom are essentially the ones that we're trying to capture throughout the year, and those really align with the ones that I pointed out in the previous diagram. So during the mating season, we really want to focus on conception date, and then can we use those tags to also look at calving date? And in between those time points, can we use this to infer information on gestation length and postpartum and estrus, but also looking at the young stock, so looking at traits such as heifer puberty. So we just started tagging heifers and 2-year-old cows in November last year with those fertility tags on both farms. And this was really done prior to mating so that we were able to look at the cycling activity throughout the mating season. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what the setup of the technology or how the setup actually worked. So we had a consultant set up the hardware on both pilot farms, and this really included a computer connected to a base station, and this was somewhere located in a shed or an office. And we strategically positioned several routers with solar panels across the farm, and this was really done in a way so that we could maximize the coverage of the area. And then, of course, we take the animals with the fertility tags. And the way the technology works is that as soon as an animal is within a range of this router, the information essentially gets sent and a signal transferred back to the base station. And those ear tags can store data up to about 7 days before the cows again have to be within the range of those solar routers again. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an idea of what this looks like behind the scenes. So this is an example of an individual animal, and those electronic ear tags really monitor fertility based on activity. So this includes activities such as rumination, grazing, and walking. And what we can really see as part of this software subscription is essentially an activity graph that tells us how much time a cow spent being active versus ruminating versus then eating. And this is broken down on an hourly basis. So Cow Manager has developed algorithms that then from this activity graph really predict if a cow was in heat at certain days. And the system then generates an alert when such an event happened and essentially notifies the farmer via an app. So pretty much every time this dark blue line that you can see here crosses the threshold, such an alert would be created. And based on what this graph tells us, we would actually assume that this particular cow conceived at that second heat event. And this is really because she did not return to cycle within the next 21 days while the bull was still with the herd. But we can also see that there are some little peaks several days later, and this is really where we need to find out what the data actually tells us. So does that mean in the meantime she lost the calf, or is this really just noise in the data? So to validate the information that's actually coming in from the tags, we're also taking a few additional measures. And one of the things that we are capturing is at pregnancy scanning. So all the heifers are fetal age scanned, which is essentially used to estimate conception dates. And we're really doing this to validate the conception date that we predicted from those fertility tags from the cycling activity. So if we just go back to the previous graph, so this cow conceived around, at least according to the fetal age scans, around the 22nd of December. So this really lines up with that second heat event from the fertility tags. So what we're really trying to do here is to estimate the true conception date of the animals. But we need to be aware that with fetal age scanning, this is usually done in 5-day increments. So this measure would really give us an indication as to when the actual conception date happened, plus minus 5 days. And then we can actually use this information to see whether the conception date that we got from the tags is likely to be the true conception date. But there are also some examples that are not as straightforward. So here, for example, you can see an animal that had quite a strong heat. So we might expect that to be the conception date, but the actual conception date lines up with just a minor peak a few weeks later. And there are also a few animals that don't come up with any visible heat signs at all, but they still conceived at some point along the way. So due to our timing, the focus so far really was on the conception date prediction. And what we're really trying to capture at the moment is how well does the conception date from the tags really align with the one predicted from those fetal age scans. So in this graph here on the x-axis, you can see the conception date from fetal aging, and on the y-axis, the predicted conception date from those tags. And if it was all perfectly accurate, they would essentially all sit on the black solid line in the middle. But we do know that fetal aging is done within a 5-day step. So this 5-day step is really what you can see here within those dashed lines. So within those dashed lines, we're pretty confident that they were accurately predicted. And then the outer dotted lines are really estimates within 10 plus minus 10 days. And some of those dots in this graph lie well outside that. And so the first example here really oops, no, it's not working anymore. There we go. So this example really shows a conception date that was predicted from the tags, which was much later compared to the one that was predicted or derived from those fetal age scans, whereas this second example would really be a perfect prediction, essentially. So as I mentioned before, this technology currently has been primarily used for dairy cattle, and it is not yet really trained on beef heifers on those extensive beef systems. So there are just a few things that are really inherently different between beef and dairy cattle. And this is not really just due to the individual animal behavior, but more importantly is probably the scenarios of where the cows are. So things like shifting of mobs has not been really perfectly taken out of the data yet. Sometimes we have issues with someone just really driving past the paddock or stopping and they all come running from all corners of the paddock. But our main focus at the moment really is finding some ways that we can adjust the algorithms to account for those scenarios as well. So at the moment, we've only just removed the tags from the older cohort and started tagging the young heifers that are used as herd replacements so that we're actually able to also look at heifer puberty around this time of year. And once we've got some more information coming in from the tags, we'll also be able to look at those other traits as well. And we will take some additional measurements for validation purposes. So one of the things we're looking at is calving dates. And this is really to see whether those tags are actually capable of also predicting calving date. And ideally, we're also hoping to get some sort of indication as to duration of calving as an indicator of calving ease. And another thing we would like to record is ovary scans. And this is really so that we can validate or see which calves have actually already reached puberty and whether they were also picked up by the tags. And being in September now, information is really starting to come in now for those heifer puberty and calving date predictions. So before we started with the trial, we really thought that our main challenge would really be to set up the technology on those extensive beef farms, but it turned actually out that the setup was pretty easy and worked well for data collection. And we found that we mainly really need to work on better understanding those activity patterns of the animal and how this essentially translates into fertility. So our focus really is on working on developing those algorithms to interpret the data. As I mentioned before, beef cow behavior and management systems are just quite different compared to dairy, and this is something we need to take into account going forward. But there really is opportunity there to adapt these algorithms for beef cows. But for our farming systems, it's just really important that we've got a system that we can use to remotely capture data and where animals don't have to be monitored 24/7. So using technologies such as those sensor-based variables could provide a good opportunity in the future to also help as an aid on extensive farming systems. And hopefully we can use this as a tool to allow us to break down fertility into those more specific components and ultimately help us to enhance the genetic gain of the New Zealand beef population. Yeah, that was my part. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Franzi. It'll be interesting to watch that space. Have we got any questions from the audience? And just a reminder to take yourself off mute if you do.
Yeah, I've got one. I was just wondering, with the fetal age scans, is there much being recorded around the actual birth date of the calf to make sure that those fetal age scans that the scanner is doing is accurate?
So the fetal age scanners we use, they have done quite a lot of fetal age scanning in dairy cows. So, and all those dairy cows, or most of them would be AI. So they've got a pretty good idea of what sort of the animal would look like, or a good comparison to what the developmental features of the animal or of the fetus would actually look like. So they are quite well adjusted and have a lot of experience of predicting fetal age scans.
So are you saying that in the dairy industry, when the data has come back, that what they're scanning, the fetal age of the calf that lines up with when the calf is born? Yeah, is that what's happening? Or I mean, at the moment, I'm just not. It doesn't look like there's much data to actually say that what they're doing is accurate, and we're just trusting them. That's sort of what I'm saying. Yeah. Is there that data there? Yeah.
So I'll jump in here, Franzi. So the properties that we're doing this work at, being Kepler, which is where our progeny test is, and also Fossil Creek Angus, which is a stud herd, are both actually measuring, well, recording calving dates as well. So we're going to be able to have a look at that. But of course, as we all know, there's a fair bit of variation around gestation length as well. So it gives you it probably gives you an indication as to whether they're in the right cycle. So yeah, I think that's the answer to your question.
Right. So they're close enough. Yeah.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions on that topic, on the fertility topic? All right. We'll move on and welcome Jason back again. And this time he'll cover the methane and feed intake work that's underway.
Thanks, Anna. So, yep, methane and feed intake. And I'm well aware that we're starting to, when we mention the word methane, we're talking about a topic that's got a range of views on it. So acknowledge that straight up. But I'll talk a little bit about that in general. Was that my next slide, or did I have one before that? No, must have been the next one. So I guess what I want to just cover is where is New Zealand on the global timeline around this space? And really, most of the methane work that has been done both here and internationally up until reasonably recently has been done in sheep. And New Zealand was actually one of the pioneers of that work, really, or probably actually the world leader in that work. And that's thanks to the work from AgResearch and also the pastoral industries, including Beef and Lamb New Zealand, funded a lot of that work through the Pastoral Research Greenhouse Gas Consortium, which started way back in 2004, actually. So there's been a lot of work done in sheep methane in New Zealand, starting with R&D, and it's really at the application stage now. Internationally, a bunch of other countries have taken up that work on methane and sheep as well. But methane's not the only trait of interest, and feed intake is really important to understand in this process as well, and I think increasingly important. And I'll talk about that in a little minute as the reasons for it. So work on sheep feed intake, and these are just rough approximations, right? But you know, it really has only been more recently, and maybe that line's a little bit too short, but you know, probably in the last 5 to 10 years that the work on feed intake has increased in sheep. In beef cattle, we're in quite a different situation. So really, we're only just starting work on methane in beef cattle in the last 12 to 18 months, I suppose. And internationally, there was some early work done, but that didn't really go anywhere. But it's certainly being picked up back now. So internationally, we're not very far behind at all in terms of the beef methane work, which is really gathering pace around the globe. In terms of feed intake, we are well behind. So internationally, in the likes of Australia, Canada, the US, feed intake work in beef cattle really began application really back in the early 2000s and has been going since. And it's really only the last couple of years in beef cattle that New Zealand's done much in this area at all. And to be honest, really in terms of doing much in that area, what I'm really talking about is application. And so two stud herds, essentially, Risington in the North Island and Tamania in the South Island, have installed feed intake facilities and started measuring that trait. So that's only pretty recent that we've been getting into that space in New Zealand. In dairy cows, again, it's pretty recent in New Zealand, maybe 2, 3, maybe even 4 years ago that started, but not much longer. And internationally, that work in methane started a little bit before where New Zealand's been, but again, not a whole lot before. So really a lot of this work has happened off the back of what's happened in sheep, and the proof of principle being created in sheep and then being expanded on in both dairy and beef cattle. So that's sort of where we are on the global timeline. When you go around the world looking at different beef industries, I suppose, and I've been lucky enough to do a little bit of that in the last couple of years, been in Canada, been in the USA, been in Ireland, you see a lot of feed intake recording facilities. And so these photos are of feed intake recording facilities in various places. The one in Canada there is actually obviously a sheep using it, but it's a beef cattle feed intake facility, just adapted at that time or flexible to use both, to be used by both beef and sheep. And so yeah, so pretty much everywhere you go, you will find those facilities. So I get equipment envy when I go to visiting these places to think what they can do with those sort of facilities. In terms of methane measurement, it's a lot newer, a lot more recent, but it is starting to really make an impact too. So the first 2 photos are what's called, or all 3 photos are what's called green feeds machine, which is a method of measuring methane in the field. The first one was actually at a commercial feedlot in Alberta, and then and that's on a trailer, so it's portable, can be put out in a paddock or in a feedlot pen. And then the second one was at Tully in Ireland, and then the third one is actually also at Tully in Ireland, but that's a unit that's not on a trailer. It's a fixed unit, so you can put them in different places. But as well, we've also been to visiting places where other people have got these things in Colorado, Tennessee, Kansas State, Olds College in Alberta, Armidale in Australia is using them. So they're being used all over the world to measure feed intake. So why methane and feed intake? So I really want to talk about both, and in my view, we need both because they're sort of all part of the same coin, 2 sides of the same coin, or maybe it's a 3-sided coin, because actually we've got 3 things that we're interested in: production, feed intake, and methane emissions. And if we look at the relationship between feed intake and production, we've called that feed efficiency, and that's not new. That's been around for a while. When we have methane, we can look at the relationship between methane and feed intake, and that's really methane yield. And so that is something that that we really want to be able to improve, which is basically to be able to eat the same number of kilos of dry matter and produce less methane from that dry matter. And then, of course, if we relate methane emissions back to production, and we're talking about essentially kilos of carcass weight produced per unit of methane emitted, then that measure is called methane intensity. So we really need to understand this relationship much better between methane emissions and feed intake. And so I guess in the messages that I'm giving to the funders is that we don't really want to do one without the other. Of course, the benefit of that too is that that we get feed efficiency along the way if we do that, and that's an important path to reduce feed intake and to reduce emissions as well. In terms of where we are in New Zealand, from the INZB program, we're really focused on just getting things started. So we measured last year, we measured the heifers that came from Kepler, our beef progeny test heifers. We took them up to INZB, and I'll show a video in a minute where those animals went through what we call cattle-sized portable accumulation chambers, which is a different technology, a different measurement technology, but measuring methane. And that was really the first time it had been done in beef animals in New Zealand. And then this year, we wanted to add the feed intake part in. So what we actually did is we've trucked the animals up to Tamania's feed intake facility. And Tamania have also poured a concrete pad, and we've taken some of those methane chambers up there as well, and we're measuring methane on those animals while they are also on the feed intake facility. So we're trying to really get both traits going. And so going forward, we're going to need to do a whole lot more of those animals. I think to date, we've done our own animals, and we also did some Hereford animals that were at Tamania, and we will be doing some Tamania animals for methane as well. And all those animals have also gone through feed intake. But overall, we've probably got about 300 to 400 animals, and we're going to need probably 10 times that number in order to develop the required knowledge, the heritabilities, the genetic correlations, etc., and be able to deliver something. So it's looking likely that we will get funding to do that, along with, and AgResearch is intimately involved with that work. And there's also international funding available. Actually, some of it is from philanthropy. So big philanthropic funds which have decided that they want to invest in helping breeding to lower methane emissions. First time in my career I've ever had philanthropy as a source of potential funding for animal breeding research, but that's, I guess, an indication of how the international community is seeing the issue, and really as a trait it's changed animal breeding in general. We're seeing people come together and collaborate because of the difficulty of the measurement, the scale of the problem is really driving collaboration. So, for example, just recently, CRV in Holland, in the Netherlands, and Vaughan Genetics, which are two really large dairy genetics companies, have signed a joint venture collaboration when they're actually competitors in the marketplace, but they're going to collaborate in methane work to be able to achieve what they want to achieve, because neither of them can do it by themselves. And it's the same thing in beef, right? So by doing some international collaboration, we'll be able to go faster and go further and share the load. So there's a collaboration that's developing. It's got Australia is involved in it, the US via American Angus Association, the British and the Irish are also involved in there, and I think Uruguay as a South American country as well. So there are collaborations developing which will help mean that we won't be doing all the heavy lifting. That will be done in collaboration with a whole lot of other people. So this slide probably really highlights that. And I guess I'd really definitely like to acknowledge AgResearch as a key driver of methane in particular as a trait, and then a bunch of other partners internationally who are lining up in terms of funding and work to work together, and we'll be part of that. So what we need to do is define trait measurement protocols and define those traits and the protocols associated with them. And this is the same. Doesn't actually matter what trait you're measuring or wanting to develop. You've got to do that. We need to then estimate all the genetic parameters, the heritabilities, the amount of variation in these things, the correlations with other traits, which underpin the breeding value estimation calculations. We also are going to need proxy measures. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then genomics to be able to roll this out. And that's where some of this collaboration can come in, because having an international collaboration can make us have much larger and more accurate reference populations. I should say the breeds that we want to focus on, that we are focusing on initially, are Hereford and Angus, with the rationale being that they are the majority of our beef breeding cow herd, and it's the cows that really are where the target is, and also they make a substantial contribution to our beef on dairy as well. This here is just a shot of, or a video clip, which I'll show in a sec, which is the AgResearch developed. Initially, they had sheep portable accumulation chambers for measuring methane, and now these are cattle ones. And I'll just
Today we're measuring methane emissions from cattle. This is the first using this system. So we've been measuring methane emissions from sheep for a long time using this particular system. When we measure gases from animals, we use a respiratory chamber which captures all of the gas for a 48-hour period. For breeding, we don't need 48 hours of measures, we just need a short measure. So what we've done is make a simple chamber that basically catches all the gas that's emitted from an animal for just 1 hour, and we monitor that, we measure that, and then we use that to rank animals. It's been successfully done with tens of thousands of sheep. The difference between a sheep chamber and a cattle chamber, obviously firstly is size. We want the cow to feel nice and safe, and we want it to be reasonably narrow, but we have to get the volume of air that we need to measure the gas in the right way. So they're quite tall. The system is built around a really calm atmosphere. Everything's kept very quiet. The animals are loaded very carefully, and we're just trying to keep everything as quiet and as calm as possible. So there are very few tools to mitigate enteric methane emissions on farm. There are very few ways that we can control our emissions. This is giving us a tool which means that we can actually control or lower methane emissions using genetics, using breeding. So we can measure animals through these chambers, we can then get a breeding value or a worth of each animal, and we can rank them. And the animals that emit less methane per kilo of grass eaten, those are the ones that we're looking for. Those are the ones that we want to breed for the next generation. And because it's heritable, if we choose those animals, then we will lower the methane emissions for generations to come.
Yeah, so that they were actually the progeny test animals from Kepler that were in that video going through those chambers. I guess I was a little bit skeptical at the start. I thought that we'd be watching a rodeo putting animals in chambers like that, but actually they're incredibly calm. They just walk out very calmly after they're released. There's no real issues with behavior in there at all. Oops. So as I said before, we've now got the next cohort of animals up at Tamania. They're currently on the feed efficiency, the feed intake facility, getting feed intake measured, and we've already completed 2 separate measurements of methane on those cattle. So this is again in the same facility. There is a front foot weighing station at the water troughs there. So there's basically weights getting recorded every time, or predicted every time the animal goes to drink, and it all ends up in a computer which you can log on to from anywhere actually, but Will can look at it from his office. And that's just another photo of the animals on the feed intake facility. I said I'd talk briefly about proxies. So methane is an incredibly expensive and technically difficult trait to measure. And so it would be really good if we had some proxy measures, I suppose, which were very good, solid predictors of what we would get if we actually measured methane. So 2 things that AgResearch have been looking at are firstly taking a rumen sample, because actually in the rumen that the bugs are living, which are producing this methane. So they take a rumen sample and basically get a genomic profile on the rumen sample. And they've found in sheep so far that that's actually a very good predictor of methane emissions, but also of feed intake as well, which I guess probably isn't that surprising because methane emissions and feed intake are definitely correlated, but they're giving good predictors of both. Taking rumen sample, the work was started in sheep. It's possible in cattle, but it's obviously a lot harder in cattle. So the second idea is, well, if we can just take a saliva swab, can we extract the DNA from the saliva swab and get the same sort of prediction as what we'd have as if we had a rumen sample itself? And so far it's looking promising. There's a little bit more work to do still in terms of being able to extract that DNA as well as can and do it efficiently. But this, yeah, it's looking promising. So if we can do that, then we can. It's obviously a lot more practical to roll out on a much wider scale in terms of some sort of proxy measurement. So I'll leave it at that. It's obviously, that's all work in progress. There's nothing that I can. There's not really, we can't say we can go and produce EBVs for these traits tomorrow because there's still research to do. But we're on our way in terms of doing that. And I guess, yeah, really want to emphasize the fact that it's an international effort. It's not just New Zealand. If we get on board now, then we can be part of going along and helping create the solutions. If we wait too long, then others will have moved past us. They'll have solved the problem, and we'll be left out in the cold. So that's really why we've put a big effort into being part of this international effort. I'll leave it there, Anna.
Well, thanks very much, Jason. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions on that topic, just pop yourself off mute now and let us know.
Hey, Jason, Joe here. Thank you for the presentation. Really interesting to see that data coming through. Quick question. Obviously, commercial farmers right now have got feed efficiency or feed intake breeding values available to them on bulls that they're buying now. What's your advice to commercial farmers in terms of how they use those breeding values that are currently already available?
So they will be available via the Angus Pro analysis. Is that what you're referring to, Joe?
Yep, exactly. The feed intake breeding values.
Yeah, because I don't actually know of any other breed that's actually got those breeding values at this point. How would I use them? I'll be using them as part of a balanced breeding program to consider feed intake, or it's actually residual feed intake, as part of my selection decision. I definitely wouldn't single trait select on them. And if you can use them in an index, then that's useful as well. But I think indexes are useful, but we also still need to look at individual EBVs as well. Is that the question you're asking, Joe, or have I misinterpreted the question?
No, I think so. I guess there's obviously a whole lot of work happening to add accuracy to those breeding values, collect more information, look at the genetic parameters, etc. Like you've said, I guess I'm thinking, okay, understand that all that work's got to happen, but also seeing those breeding values now and going, oh, well, why do we need to do all of this other work? Because there's some breeding values already here.
Oh, yep. So breeding values for those traits at the moment are basically coming from research facilities in Australia where there's a progeny test that goes through that for Angus and collects that, and then that's multiplied out via genomics. So essentially that's the training population, and then genomics is used to do that. The more data we have on feed intake as a trait, then the more accurate the genomics will be, but also the more data on closely related animals, then the more accurate the genomics will be as well. So, I think there's a strong case to be made for getting on board and collecting more data on New Zealand animals, and that will go or is going through that same analysis, but it's going to increase the accuracy for everyone. but particularly the people who are actually collecting the data, because they are the population that's most closely related.
Cool. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. Any other questions?
With the methane accumulators, the amount of time that an animal spends in there, an hour. So you've got, I don't know, you bring in any number, 40, 60, and they've all been out in the paddock. They all have a bit of a graze, and then one animal goes through and spends an hour in there, another animal spends an hour in there. There must be a difference in methane emission through the time cycle of a day for a cow, I would have thought, depending on when and how much it ate, and how long ago it ate. And if you were to, the first animal goes through, and then sort of, four animals later, 4 hours later, the fourth animal goes through that particular accumulator. Is there does the methane change from an animal during the course of a day, or is it a little bit like the body condition score, where you say the relativity through the year is always much the same, even though it might change during the year?
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, there's no daily changes in methane patterns across the course of the day, and it's largely related to when the animal last ate as well. So when the animals go through, what happens in the sheep system is there's 16 of those chambers on a trailer, and in sheep, those animals get then treated for that trait as a contemporary group if they're measured in the same 16. So they came off feed at the same time, they've gone through the chambers at the same time, so they're sort of standardized that way. For cattle, we will have to look at the data, but essentially I think AgResearch is saying at the moment that what they'll do is adjust for how long those animals were off feed. So the time that they come in is into the yards is recorded, and then obviously there's timestamps on all the data that's collected as part of the chambers. So basically they're adjusting for that. In terms of the overall variation, then you're right, it's sort of a bit the same as the body composition thing, like, so because they're all compared to other animals under the same conditions, and so it's a relative thing. And the proof in the pudding is the fact that in sheep, we know the heritability, and there has been heritability calculated in cattle as well, but using different technology. We know it's heritable. If all the data was just noise, then we wouldn't get any heritability at all. So yeah, we're confident it works.
Excellent. I see there's a couple of questions have come through on the chat around methane and feed efficiency. So one question, Jason, does the feed type the animal consumes influence methane results?
Yes, it does in the absolute sense. It's a little bit the same issue, right? And again, this is I guess projecting from sheep results to cattle results, but in sheep the work has been done to show that yes, the overall average methane produced is impacted by the feed type, but the rankings are pretty robust across the feed type. So a high emitter is a high emitter no matter what feed type you're putting it on, and a low emitter is a low emitter.
Sure thing. And is there a target number for recorded animals on methane and feed intake in New Zealand?
Yeah, so we're just sort of working that out at the moment. We think we are going to need to get to probably about 2,500, 3,000 initially, just to really be able to start estimating the correlations. That'll probably be across those two breeds, Hereford and Angus. And then, that's the research phase, but then we'll have to work out what needs to be done ongoing to be able to keep the genomic calibrations accurate, because you can't just do a genomic calibration and then walk away and use it for 20 years. You actually need data to be continually coming in, but obviously, the whole point of genomics is you don't need every animal in the country to be measured. You just need a sample to be measured to be able to then use that. So yeah, so that will be a work in progress. In sheep, we think that we need to measure about 5,000 animals a year to maintain those accuracies, but that is across a population with a lot of mixed breeds in it, and the breeds that are in there tend to have what's called a higher effective population size, which is essentially the diversity within the breed. So that number, I think 5,000 will be very challenging, but hopefully not necessary in cattle.
No, that makes sense. Does the NFI change much between a young growing heifer versus an old cow?
Yeah, really good question. So coincidentally, my background was actually, I did feed efficiency research. In fact, probably the first bit of feed efficiency research that was done back in Australia when my hair was still black and a few other things hadn't changed. And so I was part of that research program. And so what we did back then was we measured NFI on young animals, and then the heifers went into the cow herd. They had a couple of calves. And then actually we left them dry for a year from an experimental point of view, which when I look back on it, we'd never get funding to do that again now, because the opportunity cost of leaving the whole cohort dry is huge. And we put those animals back through the facility as adults. And actually the paper was only just published a year or two ago, because we didn't get it published back then. And then one of my ex-colleagues retired and decided he wanted to write up all these papers. And the correlation that was published, or that we found from that, was 0.95, which actually is even higher than what I would really expect. But essentially it's saying that at least for that situation, the ranking of feed intake and net feed intake was maintained really strongly between the young animal and the cow. In retrospect, I'd love to be able to go back and do that, put lactating animals through the system again. But you do have that complication of, well, how fast is the calf growing, and how do you account for that in the whole feed intake equation, which is why we didn't do it in the first place. But yeah, I'd love to do it again on lactating animals. But we'll probably almost certainly never get the chance.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Another question on feed intake. How are the technology advancements to predict feed intake on pasture, such as some type of bolus device or wearable sensors?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to this. Maybe I'm too old and cynical, I don't know. But so there are methods that you can use to predict feed intake on pasture. Basically, one of the methods is you dose the animal with a known quantity of a marker, and that might be through a bolus that's just a slow release type of bolus. In the old days, it was a marker called chromium oxide. And then the new technology got developed. Well, say new, it was developed in the early 90s, where they used alkane markers, which are basically the same thing as on the cuticle of a plant, the wax on the leaf of a plant. So you can measure feed intake that way, but it's got quite a lot of error associated with it. And really, it's okay for looking at mobs of animals. It's no good for looking at individuals. When we did the feed intake work back in Australia, we did that a couple of times and tried to look at high versus low mobs. And both times we did it, the trends went the right way. It looked like it was that things were working, but it was just the variation was so much that it was just, we couldn't show this. We couldn't quite get a statistical significance. I think we got it to 10% when the threshold's 5% or something like that. So that's one way of doing it, but it's not really accurate enough for individuals. The other thing is there are claims out there in the marketplace that by putting some of these AirTag sensors, similar to what Franzi was talking about actually, that some of these sensors can accurately predict feed intake. I am really skeptical about that. And the reason why is because feed intake is essentially a combination of how long's the animal spent eating, so eating duration, its bite rate, so how quickly it takes bites while it is eating, and then the size of the bite as well. I totally believe that a sensor can predict feed duration. In fact, I'm very confident about that. I'm not that confident that it can predict bite rate, but I would be prepared to believe it. And I'm really skeptical that it can predict bite size. I just don't see how it can do that. So I think it's, yeah, as a prediction, unless I see some data that empirically shows me that, yeah, these predictions work, and none of them have published that data, funnily enough, then I remain pretty skeptical about those tags. So I'm waiting for someone to publish it and really show prove that it works. Yeah. So that's a long-winded answer to a short question.
No, that makes sense though, doesn't it? That we kind of need evidence before we go ahead. Just, are there any last questions on methane or feed efficiency before we go back to a couple of the more general questions? All right. So going to a couple of more general questions, I'll ask this one to you, Jason. How have the selection indexes been used by societies in New Zealand, not being New Zealand indexes?
Right. So I guess they're not. They are New Zealand indexes, and that they've been produced for New Zealand breed associations, and they've been produced using the Australian breed plan software. So the point really is that actually by having our ability to produce indexes ourselves, we can do, there's probably 2 or 3 points about it. One is we believe that, and it's Abacus that are doing the indexes for us, right? So they're world experts in this area. They do some things that Breed Object doesn't do. One of them is putting non-linears in there around the calving ease so that we don't, if you have a straight line there for calving ease, you've either got to overemphasize calving ease or underemphasize it, whereas actually we all know we want to get to a point where we've knocked the bad balls out. But after that, once we've got enough calving ease and we don't really have a calving problem, we don't want to select animals for further calving ease, because we end up with consequences of that as well. So that's one thing. Another reason is when we do end up with new traits, then we want to have our hands on the index to be able to incorporate those new traits. And we haven't talked about parasites today, but I'll use it as an example because it is something that we're thinking that we could do. There was a bunch of research done 10 or 15 years ago. I see John Morrison's on the call, and he was involved in it. It was Chris Morris did it, looking at parasite resistance in cattle. There was never it went to a point where, yeah, with proof of principle, it could be done, but there was never a pathway to implement that. So that's one of the problems that we want to solve in New Zealand, is that actually if we want to do something new, then we can do something new for our requirements. And so again, if we were gonna do that, then we also need to be able to put indexes together. We also have another reason to have index models. It's not only about application for breed societies, it's actually about to be able to do the modelling to say, well, if we did have, for example, methane and feed intake, how would that influence our indexes or our overall balance of traits? You know, where should we be going with that? So there's a bunch of reasons why we want to have our own index model so that we can have our hands on it and do different things. Yeah, just back to the parasites thing, strategically, I think that is an example of a trait that is more important to New Zealand. And as we go forward, especially if we end up with a lot more beef cross dairy calves being finished, and we've got a heap of young animals finished more intensively in smaller areas, we know that we've got triple genetics resistance exists now in cattle. It's been found. We know it's a bit of a ticking time bomb when we've got a large number of young stock together. So, genetics is not going to be the total solution to that, but I think it could be part of the solution.
Perfect, thank you. And
Jason, I asked that question, and the reason is because I think you're giving the perception that the current indexes aren't New Zealand based, and so you're undermining those, or potentially undermining them, and creating confusion with commercial breeders, because those indexes are New Zealand indexes. They've been designed for a New Zealand environment with New Zealand economic models and those sorts of things.
I've had some inputs into them from New Zealand, yeah.
Well, they're totally put together by the New Zealand societies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just think that's a bit, it's a bit, the perception's not right that's been created. I mean, I'm not saying you don't want to have New Zealand indexes as part of your program, but I think the indexes that are there now are New Zealand indexes, and that you could be creating confusion.
Yeah, okay. I mean, maybe we should be just careful about the language we use around it. Point taken. But yeah, I definitely, I don't shy away from the fact that we do this work.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think you actually answered the next question in your previous answer. It was just around where are we at with looking at breeding resistant animals around that drench resistant.
Okay. I hadn't seen that question, but that's good.
Well done. Any other questions from the audience? All right. We'll take that everyone's pretty happy. Feel free to interrupt me or pop it in the chat quickly in the meantime. But if there are no other questions, then I'd just like to thank you all very much for attending, and also to our speakers today. It's really good to get an update and see how things are progressing. So there will be, this has been recorded, so that recording will be available as well. Thank you very much.